In India, a woman named Sonamati was stuck in a painful place with her only son. She wasn't able to feed him when he was hungry. Villagers in Myanmar, their community was stuck in a place of insecurity. They had lost their homes and forest livelihoods due to oil palm concessions, illegal logging, and other developments. In Vietnam, a girl named Nhaok, her country was stuck in a war that lasted her entire childhood. These stories about hardship are also stories about the impact of insecure land rights in people's lives. Sonamati had been deprived a share of her family's land, and so she lacked land on which to grow food. She wished for the means to be able to feed her son consistently. Villagers in Myanmar, they had been dispossessed from their forest hamlets. They feared illegal land grabs and the destruction of their environment. They wished for the means to effectively protect their community's forests. In Vietnam, Nhaok, at the age of 2, had to move from the communist north to the south with hundreds of thousands of others at the defeat of the French. And then during the Civil War, she had to relocate again, this time leaving her family to move in with her aunt in another town when the guerrilla forces started recruiting girls as spies. She wished for a stable home and a better future. At the heart of these stories is the common dream to meet basic needs and to fully develop human potential. And the role of land in these dreams, it can be hard to see. For instance, in this quantity, land is just dirt. In your house, it's for houseplants. Spilled, it's a mess. But this is part of land's surface, which covers 50 million square miles of our planet. It's the cradle of civilization, religion, society. It's the natural wealth of nations. It's what wars are fought on and over, and it's what local and indigenous communities depend on for their cultural and physical survival. It's what men, women, and children rely on for their homes, livelihoods, and source of security. Land is as indispensable as the water we drink, and it's essential in realizing many human rights, a fact recognized by the United Nations. But unlike water, land can't be channeled to where it's needed. So you have rules in the form of land rights that define who can or can't use and access, control, and transfer a given piece of land. And people make these rules. Our governments, customary and religious authorities make and enforce these rules in laws. So people have the power and potential to make and enforce laws that secure the rights to land for common people, like Sonamati, the villagers in Myanmar, and the girl in Nhaok. And when they do this, this can help lessen the grip of poverty, and it can serve as a vehicle for meeting basic needs. This value of secure land rights, it can be taken for granted by those of us who live comfortably in cities. So ask yourself, if your families rent or own your home, do you have a valid legal document like a lease or a deed that proves your right to that home? When you return home tonight, are you certain that your home will be there waiting for you and that you can't be evicted unexpectedly? If so, you likely enjoy secure rights to land. This just isn't the case for 1 billion people around the globe. At least 1 billion people suffering from poverty live in rural areas, and they lack secure rights to land. This makes the lives of men, women, and communities incredibly uncertain. It makes homes less stable, it makes them uncertain whether they can grow crops to feed their family, and it can otherwise limit options for earning a basic livelihood. Secure land rights can help transform some of these insecurities. In Myanmar, the law was changed to enable communities to have more secure rights to their forests. The villagers were able to obtain a certificate to their own community forests. They now feel empowered to raise their voices to protect these vital forest resources. And today, millions of acres of forest in Myanmar are protected by these communities. And secure land rights can help transform even some of the most incredibly extreme forms of insecurity. I learned this lesson through my work at Landesa. Our organization works to secure land rights for some of the world's poorest people. And our founder, Roy Prosterman, an American law professor, he first started advocating for land rights in Vietnam in the middle of the Civil War. He saw deep rural inequality and poverty as drivers of the conflict. South Vietnamese tenant farmers were barely making a living cultivating land owned by large absentee landlords, and they feared that if the South Vietnamese and US forces won, they'd lose even this connection to the land. So he championed land rights as a means to contribute to a big dream, a country with less conflict, a country with less poverty. Through his vision and support of the South Vietnamese government, a land rights reform program gave 1 million rural families individual rights to a plot of land. These reforms helped reduce recruitment to guerrilla forces by 80% and also increase rice production by 30%. And while too late to change the outcome of the war, it made a positive difference in the lives of the South Vietnamese and also laid a foundation for building a better future in Vietnam. In the 1980s, the government saw how effective the reforms of the South were, and they adopted these reforms across the entire country. And then in a big implementation push, 11 million rural families received land certificates in the 2000s, and the government amended its land law to ensure that the names of married women were jointly appearing on those land certificates. These reforms helped switch Vietnam from a rice importer to a rice exporter, and today Vietnam is one of the top 10 rice producers in the world and the top coffee producer after only Brazil. These sectors sustain the livelihoods of 6 million people. And today, only 3% of Vietnam's people live in extreme poverty. This is a huge accomplishment, given that half the population lived in extreme poverty some 20 years ago. And this power of land rights, it's not an anomaly in Asia. Land rights reforms have helped propel economic miracles in Japan, Korea, and South Taiwan. In the decade or two after these reforms, these countries' economies experience growth in agricultural productivity and exports that range from 40 to 50%. Given these past successes, there's reason for much optimism in the region. Today in Indonesia, the government has adopted new rules to push land rights reforms, which could benefit millions. A key challenge will be to ensure that these reforms are implemented effectively and practically across Indonesia's immense diversity. The country has many religions, hundreds of ethnic groups and indigenous communities, and some 6,000 inhabited islands. Imagine the kind of potential that could be released with secure rights to land for men, women, and communities across this great expanse. Another implementation challenge will be to ensure that this expansion of rights includes women, especially rural women, regardless of their religion, their community's customs, marital status, or other identity. My colleagues and I are interested in learning how the people of Indonesia are meeting these challenges and supporting the effort. We're visiting with officials on Java and North Sulawesi and West Kalimantan, and we're also visiting with men and women in villages. And we're particularly interested in learning what more could be done to secure women's rights to land. We take an important lesson from South Asia. In the 1990s, there was high economic growth, poverty reduction, and yet malnutrition rates remained as high as some countries in sub-Saharan Africa. The so-called South Asian enigma puts in question the assumption that economic growth alone benefits common people. An international research institute, IFPRI, found an important missing link. A factor contributing to these high malnutrition rates was women's low status as compared to men. Low status impaired women's sense of dignity, their ability to assert themselves, and to direct family resources toward their children, which increased malnutrition. Securing women's land rights is a promising intervention for increasing women's status, sense of dignity, and closing this missing link. Remember Sonamati? She was deeply ashamed when she wasn't able to feed her son. This was transformed when she received rights to an individual plot of land from a government program. She was able to build a home, grow a garden, and grow crops to feed her son. And she sold the extra to neighbors. And she was able to generate savings, and those savings she devoted to her son's education. And in Myanmar, tens of thousands of women are beneficiaries of recent land rights reform programs. In the Delta region, 400 landless families, including households headed by single women, have recently received land for growing rice. These families had been small farmers before, but had lost their land under the former government. When they received land, they knew what to do with it. They prepared the land, they acquired seeds, they planted, they harvested, they planted again. They had regained their land-based livelihoods. My colleagues visited some of these women to ask how things were going. And they complained about the bad weather, bad credit, the rice market, marginal profits, and we said, wow, you sound like a bunch of farmers. So what's changed in the last 10 or 20 years? And one woman immediately stood up and said, before we were hungry, now our babies are fat. And the lessons of these stories are supported by comparative research, which finds positive links between women's land rights and women's increased income and savings, children who are less likely to be severely underweight or sick, and women who devote more of their family's budget toward education. And research on the reforms in Vietnam found that including women's names on certificates, both single and married women, this helped increase the rate of self-employment and also reduce poverty at the household level. These positive outcomes come through women's increased control over family assets and their increased voice and bargaining power within the household. And while there's been strong progress in various countries in Asia, in other places, women's land rights still remain inferior to men's under formal law, customary law, and religious law, and women face extra barriers to acquiring land, whether through a government program, purchase, or inheritance. So based on this information, I raised 2 questions to policymakers around the globe who are interested in meeting their citizens' basic needs through improved agrarian policy. 1, are all women equally and independently guaranteed rights to land under formal law? And 2, are implementation efforts fully including women from the beginning? This means, are women included in the new land allocations? Are women's names appearing on land certificates? And are women actively participating in all land reform processes, like the example set in Mangkit village in Minahasa, Tenggara in North Sulawesi? If not, consider what kind of potential your country could be missing out on. And for all of you, have the conversation. Think about why land rights is important to you, your families, your communities, your country, and ask women, really ask women, why land is important to them and what their dreams are. Share your stories with your families, your government officials, and your religious and customary leaders. And 2, take action. Learn whether your country's laws guarantee equal opportunity for men and women to obtain rights to land in law, and find out whether these rules are implemented in practice. Find and support a local organization promoting the cause of land rights and women's empowerment. And finally, based on what you've learned today, envision what kind of dreams, big and small, could be achieved if everyone, including women, enjoyed secure, documented rights to land. In Vietnam, the Civil War lasted 2 decades, and during that time, that girl named Nhout grew up. Ultimately, she took a very brave step. She said goodbye to her parents, and she left her home country to come to the United States. She came with only a suitcase in hand. She did night school, she worked, she saved until she had enough to afford the down payment on a small condominium. 40 years later, she still talks about that property with pride. It was her first home on land belonging to her since she left her home village in North Vietnam at the age of 2. Later, she was able to sell this land in order to start a new life with her husband and 4 children. Land provided the foundation for running their family business and raising their growing family. It also provided opportunities and stability for their children. This woman still owns this land and lives in the same home with her husband nearby her children and grandchildren. This woman is my mother. When dreams like hers and Sonamati's come true, we're one step closer toward meeting basic needs and developing human potential for everyone. That's what secure rights to land means: empowerment, choices, and the ability to pursue a dream. Thank you for listening.